Hello, and welcome to Encounters with Polish and Ukrainian Literature, brought to you by the Polish Cultural Institute, New York. I'm David Goldfarb, and I'll be your host. This episode, the third in a string of episodes on Ukrainian topics, marks the second anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine that began on February 24th, 2022. And today we have a very special guest, Ukraine's leading public intellectual, Oksana Zabuzhko, joining us from Kyiv, together with one of her English-language translators, Halyna Hryn. Before we meet our guests, let me remind you to subscribe, click the bell to receive notifications about new programs, and leave a comment to show your engagement, which will raise our program's profile in the search rankings on YouTube. Oksana Zabuzhko, born in 1960, is one of Ukraine's most important contemporary writers, the author of more than 20 books of poetry, fiction, and nonfiction. She made her poetry debut at the age of 12, yet as her parents had been blacklisted during the Soviet purges of the 1970s, it was not until Perestroika that her first book saw the light of day. She graduated from the Department of Philosophy of Kyiv Shevchenko University and obtained her PhD in the philosophy of the arts. Since the publication of her novel, Fieldwork in Ukrainian Sex, which in 2006 was named the most influential Ukrainian book for the 15 years of independence, she has been able to live as an independent freelance author. Oksana Zabuzhko has for years been listed by the media among Ukraine's top 100 most influential people. Since 2013, she, along with her partner, artist Rostyslav Luzhetsky, have operated a small publishing house promoting quality, non-commercial literature. Her works have been translated into more than 20 languages, and she has received a MacArthur Grant, the Antonovich Prize, the Ukrainian National Award, the Order of Princess Olha, the Shevchenko National Prize of Ukraine, the French National Order of the Legion of Honor, and many other awards. Her magnum opus, The Museum of Abandoned Secrets, won the Angelus Central European Literary Prize for the Best Novel of Eastern and Central Europe in 2013. And her recent work, The Longest Journey, published originally in 2022, a book-long essay on the cultural and historical background of the current Russo-Ukrainian War, won the Book of the Year award in Ukraine, and has been translated into 9 languages thus far. Her story collection, Your Ad Could Go Here, was just named one of the 5 best books from Ukraine by The Guardian in the UK. Halyna Hryn has served as president of the Shevchenko Scientific Society since 2018 and has been the editor of the journal Harvard Ukrainian Studies at the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute since 2005. She earned her PhD in Slavic literature from the University of Toronto and has taught language and culture courses as a lecturer at Toronto, York University, Manitoba, Harvard, and Yale. She has translated Oksana Zabuzhko's fieldwork in Ukrainian Sex and many of the stories in Your Ad Could Go Here for Amazon Crossing, as well as Peltsa and Pentameron, 2 novels by Volodymyr Dibrova for Northwestern University Press, among other works. Her book, Literaturny Yarmarok, or The Literary Fair, Ukrainian Modernism's Defining Moment, is forthcoming in Ukrainian from Kritika in 2025. Oksana and Halyna, welcome to the program. It's great to finally have you both here.
Thanks for invitation.
Thank you.
My impression was you were in Warsaw when the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine began. Tell us about your Oksana, your time in Poland right after the outbreak of the latest phase of the war.
Your impression is right, but you can't name it my time in Poland. It was not time in Poland. When I turned on my Google location in my telephone in the end of 2022, Google reacted, "Congratulations, Oksana, you have visited 21 countries and 93 cities this year." And that was the moment, the first time in my life that I started to scream back to the artificial intellect, screaming, "You idiot, who told you I wanted to? It was not my choice."
Right.
But the story is that I did arrive to Poland on February 23rd. According to a well-elaborated plan, which my Polish publisher presented to me half a year in advance. And that was the date when my new Polish book, the collection of essays entitled Planet Wormwood, appeared in Poland, appeared in Polish bookstores, and I came for 3 days promo trip. For 3 days of scheduled interviews, meetings with the readers, 2 meetings and 12 or 13 interviews. I don't remember exactly how many. So I came in the afternoon with the afternoon flight, which later on appeared to be the last flight available from Ukraine to the EU at all until now. Yes, I've given 2 interviews and went to bed tired and full of impressions in my Warsaw hotel, only to be awakened in a couple of hours with a phone call from home. At the first moment, I was very much irritated when I saw it was my husband calling so early. Because after all, I'm having, such a tight schedule, and it's going to be such a hard and intense trip. And why is he waking me up so early? And that was the moment when I heard, honey, it started. They are bombing us. And that was the moment millions of Ukrainians recall, as the one drawing the line before and after. And that's how I got stuck. No one was canceling. My Polish publisher, of course, did not cancel my premeditated and well-elaborated program. On the contrary, I had twice more interviews that were, started to arrive immediately, as the news got spread. And then, in fact, my publisher was very happy, to have me at hand at the moment, because they had to repeat the print after a week or something. So the book was a big success, I would say. But that was, the first weeks and the first months, I would say. Yeah, there were crazy time because I arrived with carry-on and having left my laptop back home.
Wow.
I counted, on getting back going back after 3 days. So I was just, this woman with a carry-on suitcase somewhere out all of a sudden, floating in the air, so to speak, with my library and my archive and everything, that makes writers' invisible background left in the bombed city with no understanding whether I'll be able ever to get back or anything, because it was not yet known for the first day whether the flights were cancelled or postponed. For the first day, they were postponed, marked as postponed. So I wouldn't call it, I was on the road. For the whole year, I would say, I was on the road, of course, with a couple of literary residences generously offered to me by supportive Polish organizations, foundations, which helped me to do this book the book long essay, which unfortunately hasn't yet appeared in English, where I told all that story, The Longest Journey. I wrote it in the first months after the invasion at the request of my Italian publisher.
So for the supposed 3-day invasion, you were spending 3 days in Poland, and then it was all going to be over. When did you first get back to Ukraine? When were you able to return to the country?
Half a year later, in summer.
Did you stay in Western Ukraine, or were you able to get back to Kyiv?
I can say I stayed. I came for a short visit, so to speak, for a short business visit, because I had 11 books appearing in Europe in the fall, and that was really the long book tour. So I had to go back to business.
Right.
Well, and then there was this blackout winter, again, when I was hiding in Europe in the residences, in Poland, basically, at literary residences to be able to work, which was back then, last winter, absolutely impossible in Ukraine. So I do owe a lot to Poland, as we all do, I think, because the Poles did take this war as their own business from the very first moment. And that was really interesting. That was, I would say, a lifetime experience to watch.
Mm-hmm.
I learned a lot not only about Poland or Ukrainian-Polish relations. No, that's too simple. But on some more profound level, I learned a lot about how history works, how it gets defrozen all of a sudden, how this great war in Ukraine, it really worked with Poles' collective memory.
Mm-hmm.
And this deeply buried layers of their own traumatic memory dating back to the World War II got immediately reactivated. They all had fallen in love with our President Zelensky, which took me by surprise, unless I realized that they make all these projections. September 1939 and Polish government leaving. Okay, the army sent to the field, to the battlefield, and the Polish government leaving to Romania. So the fact that Ukrainian government stayed and Ukrainian president stayed and made himself very articulate with that regard, immediately made him Polish national hero, so to speak, because it offered the Poles a hope that this time history will not repeat itself.
Right.
That it is not the same circle, that's the same story. Like here they go again, because there were many parallels, and people were drawing these parallels. People were, seeing the similarities in national myths. In their own Polish national mythology, like Westerplatte, the heroic resistance of Westerplatte. And here, this new history happening, transpiring right in front of their eyes, or rather, on their TV screens with the Snake Island, and that was the subject, of the most, I would say, the most fiery attention on the part of the entire Polish society. So that was really a very special experience, that being in Poland in spring 2022. And watching what is happening in your country along with your Polish friends and colleagues and your Polish audience, because yes, I was doing this book presentation. I still was doing this book presentation, and that's during that spring. So that's really something. I do write a little bit about this in The Longest Journey. Basically, it is the book dedicated to the broader cultural and historical contexts of this war that the Western readership has totally omitted since 2014.
I've read the short excerpt that appeared in the Kyiv Independent, which we'll include in our bibliography on the Polish Cultural Institute's webpage for this episode. So first of all, do you know what the plans are for publication in English? Do you have a translator and a publisher?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. All right. There are editors who watch this program. So I hope they will look at the bibliography and look at that excerpt and listen to this description. And maybe someone will pick it up because it does happen sometimes. I hear from people who've been on the show, translators, that we've mentioned something on the show and then they've gotten a call from a major publisher sometimes.
So not always. Nice.
It would be nice. It's not always a major publisher. Sometimes it's a minor publisher, but it's, you need a publisher.
Well, it's already appeared. By now, it's already appeared in 9 countries. It's been translated into 9 languages. Starting with Italian, German, Swedish, Norwegian, Polish, of course, and others. But basically it's, I would say it's the subject of European interest. Right. And by the way, this book is making its way, through different publishers, publishing markets. I can sense, the degree of involvement of different societies in the subject of Russian-Ukrainian war. The best sales are, of course, in the Baltic countries, which feel very much like, okay, they are the next in the line, and if, God forbid, Ukraine won't manage it, okay, then next day the Russian tanks will be in Riga or Vilnius. So in Riga I have extremely good sales. Just this morning, I was reading a wonderful review, a very, very emotional and very philosophical review of a Latvian writer, reflecting of her past pacifism and how dearly it costed her, to get rid of this pacifism and to wake up to this new reality of the 21st century. We all have been so long reluctant to recognize.
Mm-hmm. So is the book mainly a work of intellectual and cultural history? Is that as opposed to fiction or other things that you write?
Well, it is an essay, So when the Italian public, the guy from Einaudi called my international agent, the request was something like 120,000 characters, please, no more. And please tell Mrs. Zabuzhko to cover what we have missed about this war. So let her make it more or less like Timothy Snyder or something. And exactly. My reaction was, thank you very much for that laughter. My reaction was more or less the same. I said, I'm very sorry, I am no Timothy Snyder.
I like Timothy very much. I've done events with him and so forth. But he's him and you are you.
I loved him, and well, I love reading him as well. But to begin with, I'm not an academic. I am a writer, and of course, it should be a personal approach to the war, and it should be sharing. That's why you need writers. You need a personal view on the big historical narration, on the grand narration of history. You need the voice of a participant and witness being interwoven, in this grand tapestry, and that's how I more or less combine, my experience of someone who has been there for the past 30 years and who has been learning, how to deconstruct the stereotypes, which were closing the horror of the real picture from most of, well, Western and Ukrainian intellectuals as well, because I can't say that Ukraine was fully prepared, for the full-scale invasion. We were also trying to be rational and to think in rational terms. And that's, very Western, and this not always works this way. And so I really had to go back like 300 years ago, and to split the story into two. So I do have a 30 years long story starting after 1989 with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and I'm trying to prove it is kind of a Graham Greene-like story, sounding like a political detective. But my point is that, yes, the war has always been in preparation. From the moment of the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russian, the idea, of getting back to what had been lost in 1991 has never left Kremlin. I mean, I have enough, we all have enough proofs of that now, but there were many proofs, in the past 30 years, which we preferred not to notice. And there is 300 years long story, which is a dramatic and very interesting history of Ukrainian-Russian relations and how Ukrainians contributed to creating Russian Empire, which they now turned out to be responsible for finishing. And when you take up that view, then everything sounds very logical, and even all this, historical deviations that Putin is constantly plunging into. Like, his recent interview to Carlson Tucker, yeah?
Tucker Carlson, yeah.
Yeah. So this all makes sense. It is not just madness. No, I mean, he is very rational in his own way, and that's an advantage to be a writer. And that's, I think, why the world needs us writers in the moment, when the routine logic ceases to work, because we are experts in imagination, as one interviewer told me. I really loved that definition. And this war is, to a large extent, in my deep conviction, the result of the crisis of imagination. the global crisis of imagination. And writers are capable to get under the skin of any character, including those like Mr. Putin, not with their political projections as decision makers do, but to see them as their characters, and yes, I can take, Mr. Putin's standpoint, and I see that from his standpoint, he is very, persistent, consistent, and logical. So that's just, the matter of proper picturing the character.
So let's maybe take a look at some of your work that's available in English, which is just a modest amount. But I know we talked about maybe reading some passages, and maybe this would be a good moment to look at this at the beginning of Fieldwork in Ukrainian Sex, which is translated by Halyna Hryn, who is with us today. And you have a very interesting passage at the beginning about the relation of the poet to language. We should say that you began as a poet, right? I mean, we have another recent collection of your selected poems here, which I don't know if we'll get to. But do you still write poetry?
I still do. Occasionally, yeah.
Occasionally, okay. I know you've mostly moved to prose, but maybe would you like to read maybe the beginning of that passage that we discussed, which starts on page 10 of the English edition, but maybe read a few lines in Ukrainian to bring us into it, so we can hear the rhythm of at least the rhythm of what your language sounds like, so that even those who don't read Ukrainian can have a little sense of it.
Увечері, в самому розповні фестивальної програми, в густих випарах поту і алкоголю, куди ти зійшла з естради, відчитавши своє, 2 вірші. 2 холерно добрі вірші, просто нетверезий гул злитих водяне, довкружне блимання жовтоплямних фізій, точніше поверх його, тримаючись за звук власного, ні на що не вважаючого, тільки словам підвладного голосу. Прилюдний оргазм, от як це називається, але вставляє публіку завжди і всюди. Навіть коли слів ніхто ніфіга не тямить. Навіть у чужомовному оточенні. Перше ти відвідала колись на писательському збіговиську в одній азіатській країні, де тебе з чемності прошено почитати рідною мовою. You mean it is not Russian? І ти стала читати з обиди й розпуки, просто працювати зі своїм Russian ще тоді, слухаючи тільки власний текст, ховаючись в нього, як просвітлений дім уночі заходячи.
That evening, when the program was in full swing and you descended into the thick vapors of sweat and alcohol after reading your piece, 2 poems, 2 damn good poems projected straight into the intoxicated din of splotchy yellow faces congealed into one encompassing mass of flashing lights, or more precisely projected straight over it, holding on to the sound of your own, oblivious to all around and subservient only to yourself, voice. A public orgasm, that's what you call this, but it does it for the crowd, every time and every place, even when they have no clue what the words mean, even in a foreign-speaking environment. You first discovered this at a writers' forum in one far eastern country, where out of politeness they asked you to read in your native language. You mean it's not Russian? And you began reading then in insult and desperation, listening to your own text. You were sick to death of their Russian even then. Concealing yourself within it, the way one slips into a lit house at night and locks the door behind. In midway, you suddenly realized that in the frozen silence, you were being heard. Mova, your language. Even though nobody understood it, in full view of the public, it had concentrated around you in a clear, sparkling sphere of the most refined, crafted glass, inside which magic was happening. This could be seen by all, Something was coming to life, pulsating, firming up, arching into broad billows of flame, and then misting it up again, as happens with glass that is exposed to heavy breathing. You finished your piece, enveloped, crystal clear, protected. Now that would have been the time to realize that your home is your language, a language about which only a few hundred people around the world can still speak properly. It would always be with you, like a snail's shell, and there would not be another non-portable home for you, girl, no matter what you do. And afterward, all these people, round-faced, balding, dark and curly-haired, with turbans and without, shook your hand long and with feeling, and not letting you incidentally get to the bathroom. Your stomach was giving a decided thumbs down to their musky, spicy cuisine, and was trumpeting the bastard precisely at the moments when gracious thank yous were called for. After that, there was no audience that you couldn't handle, even hardened criminals. Whether you call it exhibitionism or not, it was your own text that would always protect you from abuse and humiliation. You read it the way you wrote it, out loud, led by the self-propelling music of the verse. One normally does not allow witnesses to this process, except in the theater, and that's why, in fact, it's so powerful. And the festival rabble, too, piped down somewhere in the middle of your reading. It surrounded the glass sphere and breathed in unison. And then, when you, cooling off from the applause, were no longer on the platform, but down below in the half-darkness, in some tight, friendly circle, it's humid, smoky, someone was pouring a glass, someone was laughing, faces flashed by like film frames. You were stretching out your hand to get either a cigarette or a wine glass. That man appeared beside you for an instant, as though he'd tripped over you accidentally, cat eyes gleaming in the dark, an excited whiskey breath whisper, "You were great." And equally casually, without pausing, he tried to squeeze your hand, reaching for it as it stretched out towards the cigarette or wine glass. And you remember this because, after all, who didn't shake your hand in that teeming multitude? With that awkward grasp, that perpendicular chop almost across the thrust of your own arm, the same way he later raced up a one-way street the wrong way and got the police sirens after him. He managed to bend your thumb back in a particularly painful way, and your sirens instantly started screaming, a lightning-quick flash through your consciousness. Strange how in that confused moment, the message was so clear and you knew, as if some bystander in your head uttered a calm, meaningful, grammatical sentence. This man is going to hurt you.
I want to get to the poem, but let's pause for a minute so I can ask you about the idea of being, home in your language. That's a big theme of this book. I mean, fieldwork in Ukrainian sects is a work of certainly feminist writing about the mind, the body, the personal, and the political, but in a very different way from I think the way American feminists talk about the relationship between the personal and the political, because of that dimension of language that's so key to your description of experience. And how has that been?
That's a great observation. You are a second person who made this observation. And the first one was a Russian literary critic, a smart guy, actually.
Okay.
That was ages ago, when Russian critics were still allowed to be smart. They are not any longer. But some, 20 years ago when it appeared in Russian. And he had his own theory that basically it is the revolt of a language, the revolt of a Ukrainian language against, I'm just quoting him, against two imperial ones, against Russian and English. When Russian and English are turned into the old Greek choir, so to speak, and Ukrainian has a monologue. I just found it, a kind of a memorable observation, because that's something which never occurred to me. You are not aware, when you are writing, you are not aware of what you are doing, and the observations like this, they really help you to see your own work in a totally different light. But yes, basically it is a language novel. You are absolutely right. I think it's totally untranslatable, by the way, and the fact that it is my most translated novel, some 20-something languages by now. Well, that's some kind of misunderstanding, because it is all about language, and it is important. It is important for the plot, so to speak, that the narrator, the protagonist, is a poet. So it is important to show in her monologue is supposed to show that how good poet she is, and how she uses the language in her own inner monologue. And I think Halyna did it brilliantly in her translation.
Halyna,
I enjoyed listening.
Could you read the translation?
Precisely in this way. In other words, it was not the hurt thumb that was the issue, and you understood that perfectly. And that's the point, my dear. You knew everything right from the start. No, you knew it even before the start. About a week before that trip to the festival, there was one evening where your bared nerve ends, painfully, thirstily, as only happens in the fall, exposed to the outside world, out to meet its faltering autumn colors, the mysterious rustle in sleepy leaves, captured this passage, which you didn't grasp then, so left it unfinished, this poem. Something has shifted in the world. Someone was crying out my name in the night as though from a torture chamber, and someone rustled leaves on the porch, tossed and turned and could not fall asleep. I was learning the lessons of parting, the science of differentiating the pain of illness and the pain of affirmation. Someone was writing me letters and throwing them into the fire, unable to finish the line. Someone was waiting for something from me, but I was silence. I was learning the lessons of parting.
Щось зрушилося в світі. Хтось кричав крізь ніч моє ім'я, неначе на тортура. І хтось на ганку листям шарудів, перевертався і не міг заснути. Я вчилася науки розставання, науки розрізняти біль недужний і біль животворящий. Хтось писав листи до мене, але я мовчала. Я вчилася науки Хтось писав листи до мене і кидав їх у грубку, рядка не дописавши. Хтось чекав чогось від мене, але я мовчала. Я вчилася науки розставання.
You have like sort of two levels of narration. You have this outermost narrator speaking in the second person. I mean, when we're undergraduates, we learn about first person narration and third person narration, but we never talk about second person narration, which is something you can find in Homer. In Homer, if it's second person narration, they're either speaking to the dead or somebody who's about to be dead. And here, I mean, there's a narrator speaking to the poet, who is like the central consciousness maybe of the work. And then we get her poem. Is her poem your poem? I mean, it is your poem, but are you thinking about writing in a different voice than your own voice when you're writing about her poem, when you're writing her poem?
That's an interesting question, actually. I never thought about it. This alienation, this like kind of, partying, kind of, of course, I am not 100% Oksana. So, of course, I did invest, a lot of, my own flesh and blood into her to make her a living person. And it is a kind of a schizophrenic experience, I would say, especially with the poems, because poems is like this, externalization of the of the inmost experience, the most intimate and the most unpronounceable experience. So I would say for me, there is just one important principle which I was trying to follow through the whole novel, through the entire novel. That she is good, as a poet, but she's not quite aware of how good she is. I mean, she is all about, being a fan of this man. It is him who is a genius, and her own talent is a kind of a secondary in her own mind to his. And that's, this feminist moment, I think, to which the female part of the audience reacted as well. That why on earth, is she so keen about him being a genius? Why doesn't she think of her own, gifts and to take care of herself and everything? So that was about, showing in words, showing in my text, how good she is, rather than making this, rather than just claiming this.
Right. So there has to be some real poetry there. And it's hard not to write poetry that's yours. Let me ask you both. What's your working relationship like as a translator and author? I ask this to all the translators who work with living authors who appear on the program, and I'm trying to get turn the program into kind of a survey of because I think a lot of new translators, they don't understand, they have certain expectations of what it's like to work with a living author, and I think in every case it's different. I mean, that sometimes even the same translator will say that, oh, well, with this person, they just gave me a free hand and said, I don't know English, you do what you want. And the other one said, and the other one said, well, I don't know much English, but I want to know exactly what you're saying. So you have to explain it to me in Polish, right? So how is it between the two of you? Halyna, is Oksana overbearing and looking over your shoulder all the time, or does she let you do what you want? Or
she probably should do it more. No, not at all. Not at all. I'm always very grateful for her comments. The way it is that I try my best, and I would send her a draft, which she would kindly read because it's a lot of reading. And, she would catch the odd mistake, but really it was more a question of comprehension. Did I actually understand, what the mood was? Translation it's very personal for me. I don't like editors at all. Even when they improve the text, but it just doesn't ring like it's me, because once I do it, it's in my ear and I sort of remember it forever. So no, it's been really, I would say, perfect from my point of view. I'll do my text and then she will correct the comprehension things. I guess that's all I can say.
And Oksana, what's it like for you working with all these different translators in different languages?
Well, maybe I should start, with Once Upon a Time line, because I really need to explain that I did wait for Halyna to be able to afford, to translate this novel for some 12 years.
Wow.
Yeah, because she is damned good.
Mm-hmm.
And when the book came out in Ukrainian, she read it and she loved it. And that was, this chemistry and synergy. And she did an excerpt, and which I immediately recognized as my English voice. So I knew that it is her who should be the translator of this book. And it was really better to wait, than to give the book to someone else and to have it, well, maybe not quite ruined or destroyed or something, though for language writers like myself, of course, dependency on our translators, is really, at the degree of a high risk. We are totally dependent on our translators, and to find a translator of your own, this relationship, author and translator. Well, it is something like, I don't know, the kind of sisterhood, or I don't know what to compare it to. Like, okay, teacher, pupil, no, sisters, brothers, well, I don't know, some kind of kinship.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely some kind of kinship. I can tell how much I appreciate having in a number of languages the translator of my own, with whom I work for years, and whose work is 100% reliable to me. So, I mean, just some, minor like mistakes or some misunderstandings. Okay, that's nothing. But the proper tune, the same group of blood. Okay, that's
Right.
the definition,
Same blood
so
type.
there should be the same group of blood, and with Halyna, that's exactly it, the same group of blood, and I really appreciate that. Though, of course, in case of your ad could go here. Well, it's a complex book because, yes, it is a collection of stories, and different stories were translated. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
I have it too.
Why don't we could all hold it up? Okay, we all have
Okay.
it.
So different stories were translated by different translators in different years. So, of course, to orchestrate it all somehow in, I don't know, one music, to give it one music and one intonation, the publishing house has hired an editor who did this final orchestration. That was Nina Murray, who is my other
your other translator of the Museum of Abandoned Secrets, which is a very substantial volume.
Yes, and very complicated work. Yes, so she has really, done a fantastic job with that novel, which I highly appreciate, and she has done the general editing, of these different voices. So it was not my part of a job. And I think it would have been interesting, to have this discussion among the translators, how they recognize, or to what degree they recognize their voice being orchestrated in that book. Maybe Halyna can tell more about that.
Do you think that Oksana's work all, through several translators now, I mean, do you think it all has the same voice approximately?
I think the translator always lays their own voice over top of it. And, there's really no such thing as a wrong translation.
No.
Even I was looking at this morning, and I'm thinking, I would probably do it differently now, certain phrases. I see these Canadian phrases that are no longer, I've been in the United States for 20 years. It just doesn't seem like there's something that says goodbye, Charlie. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, that probably sounds very strange. So And secondly, with each generation, all great works, they're reinterpreted and so on. So I think that, there's no such thing as a bad translation. And I have an interesting, I was just today looking at my unedited translation and comparing it to the edited one and thinking, of course, everybody's kind of defensive about their own writing a little bit, but it's much more polished, much more elegant, less edgy. So, it's a question of how it's going to, I like mine, but this is no worse. Actually, in many cases, the editing helped. But the voice will be different for every person, and probably with every decade, the same person might even translate it in a different way because you're always catching something different.
Would you like to read from your ad? Go here, maybe the beginning. You said you wanted to read the translator's cut of No Entry to the Performance Hall After the Third Bell.
My own, of course, is a little bit rougher because it wasn't the final. The final copy. I had actually, and a little bit. I know that it's taken me a long time. I would just also like to maybe before I get into it, comment on the relationship as well, which is, what I really sort of appreciate and recognize, let's say, in Oksana's books, is that 300-year struggle, which has now been made manifest by this war, 300 years of trying not to get obliterated and not get erased by the maniacs next door. It's in there, it's in the writing. I mean, in poet after poet, in history after history book, that struggle to withstand that attempt at erasure is always there. And, I immediately recognized it. We're all brought up, we're all to some extent traumatized by it because we're always aware of it and fighting back. And I recognized it in Oksana's work right away. Oksana's father was a dissident who had gone through repression. And I, on the other hand, being on this side of the Atlantic, had spent my youth, in committees defending Soviet political prisoners and so on. So it was just... and of course, everybody's parents went through the trauma of war and all of that. And it's with you, with generation after generation, whether you realize it or not, you think that it's just in the realm of writing, in the realm of literature. And then suddenly the war breaks out. And it's what Oksana was talking about, like in Poland. All of a sudden, everybody remembers. It's sort of in your bones. You know about this. You recognize it. So it was that kind of recognition in her work. And partially, it's also that thing that made me into what Ukrainians used to call it, hromadski diach. I know somebody was trying to explain it to an American. He said, we have this thing called a diach. It's people who are sort of wedded to the cause, is to quote another person, the title. And it's
just public activists, huh?
Yeah, it's more than just public activists. It's sort of like totally in your bones. You're just wedded. Yeah. You know that in addition to your regular life, you're also here, to fight the good fight. When you're teaching Ukrainian, it's like the fate of Ukraine depends on making every student. Well, the Russians are really good at that too. Just look at our Slavic departments. So it's that kind of recognition. And so that's also the way that one of the things that got in the way of my becoming like a full-time translator, because there's always another student to teach. There's always another article to do for somebody else. So I do. The fact that, of course, that she had to wait for 12 years is not a good thing, but maybe
but it was worth it.
But maybe when I retire, I will be able to do more.
I'll confess, I felt a certain sympathy when reading the line in fieldwork in Ukrainian sex about the man who imagines he's going to write a book about Bruno Schulz in the future. Since I work on Bruno Schulz and I have several articles, and eventually my book will come out, but I'm not there yet.
It's not unique to Ukrainians, it's out for everybody. Yes. But anyways, getting back to
please read
this work, you have sort of a different version here, the edited, the more polished version, and then you have my original version, which I thought maybe why don't I try? It always begins with a trifle, with a speck of dust in your eye, with a bad mood, with a childhood grudge. Nursed by some kind of screwed up Gavrilko princip. You shouldn't have made fun of the little loser. But then, next thing you know, before you even have a chance to get Gavrilko princip, for those who need to look it up, that's the guy that started the First World War.
Right.
Because this is, and then before you even have a chance to catch your breath, there's a cosmic catastrophe on your hands, and go ahead and try to stop it now. Roll up the window, please, was all she said to the kid as the car turned up Saksahansky Street. She remembered this phrase the way one remembers the pattern on wallpaper at the moment the wall comes crashing down on your head. She remembered every detail of that instant, the smell of lead exhaust blowing in from the street included, and the wind and the sudden whip of the draft straight into her ear. And just before, how she was looking out the left window, turning her head away, at two women on the sidewalk at the crossing with identically dyed blonde hair, an older and a younger one, gesticulating excitedly about something of their own, like a film when the sound has been turned off. Their voices couldn't reach her through the closed glass pane, but even without sound, it was clear that this was a mother and a daughter, and that they felt good together. And perhaps it was this that prompted her to give a shout from the back seat to her daughter. Maybe a little bit more agitated than necessary, but it was still quite peaceful and controlled. "Roll up the window, please." She remembered the intonation with which she pronounced it and was ready to admit, honestly, yes, that was a release of long-time swollen irritation and undisguised reproach. "You don't think about your mother at all. You couldn't care less if I catch a cold, lose my voice. Whereas I, by the way, happen to support you, feed you with this voice, like a pelican with its chest. And it's time you stop treating it like it's deserved and begin to appreciate it, at least a little. After all, you're not a little girl anymore." That's what she really wanted to convey to her frowning child, who stubbornly displayed only the delicate, newly cropped back of her head from the front seat throughout the whole trip, not deigning to turn around even once. That child that she could no longer imagine standing with like this in the middle of the street, both of them waving their arms and laughing. The young blonde was imitating something to her mother, perhaps making fun of her boyfriend. And that reproach was meant to ricochet and reach her husband as well, sitting at the wheel in his favorite position of non-involvement, for whom the both of them at the moment were merely valuable cargo. They're chirping away about some of their own matters like little birds, and that's fine, almost like a radio in the background, classical or jazz lounge. In other words, what is there to say? She indeed felt neglected and alone at the moment, a stranger to these two showing the backs of their heads in the front seat. It seemed like they had written her off long ago and now merely exploited her, each in his own way. What a nasty feeling, almost like a child wronged with nobody to run to for justice, a wrong committed to a girl in an orphanage or a foster home who then cries in the bathroom. Although, if you really think about what does she know about orphans crying in the bathroom in child institutions? Maybe this is all because of the war, she thought about it later. Maybe the war is to blame for everything. It's 3 years of aggravating war accumulating under one's skin that's beginning to show itself. Like we have all silently agreed that there are people among us who are supposed to die from Russian bullets so that we can continue to meet for mojitos at night in front of the television screen where the football or the soccer game is going on. We're going to pay them salaries for that. And their families too, once they've been killed. And aside from that, we do nothing, right? Although we make ourselves feel better by supporting our troops, over hill, over dale, helpful Billy hits the trail, a whole country of such helpful Billies, and each of them is finding it harder and harder to respect himself. Her husband has long since fallen into the habit of beginning each day by checking the Facebook feed, from which he gathers photos of orphans of the anti-terrorist operation, as it is euphemistically called. Olha never managed to force herself into the habit of looking at those pictures. Her eyes would immediately fill with tears, and then she'd have to head for the kitchen and pour herself something strong to drink to get over it. He'd make copies of them and place the banking information of where the donations could be sent into a separate file and regularly send out modest sums. Several hundred hryvnias, taxes on our conscience, Olha would think but never say aloud. Over the years, there was much that they had stopped saying to each other aloud. The war taught them that, too. Taught them that it's a lot easier to destroy with words than with bullets, so better treat them gingerly and not expend them without purpose until you're sure of what you're doing. And that's why she said to her offspring, and that's why all she said to her offspring was the single phrase, "Roll up the window, please." Only 5 words, and you see what came out of it.
Everybody who is a translator out there, get the book, listen to that, and read along, because that's like a lesson in how to work with an editor, and what the editor might do. I mean, it's like some of those edits, I can see why they did that, and some of them I said no, it's better than the original. Just right now, right? As you're going along.
And this is no criticism of the editor. I mean, her refinements were great, and also in the other works. Certainly, there's a wonderful story in there about good and evil. What we had as the reed pipe tale, but now it's the Gelder Rose. The tale of the Gelder Rose flute, as opposed to the reed pipe tale. Now, there's a difference in the titles, right?
Yeah. So this is published by Amazon Crossing, I see. And people have different views about working with Amazon Crossing. I mean, do they supply the editor, or do you have to find your own editor? Or how does it work?
They hired an editor, but I think that what Oksana says, the fact that you have to kind of weave all these disparate things together. Mm-hmm. It does also matter, and yes, it just goes to show you the variety that there is out there, and how it can all go.
And that was, I'm gathering that was written around when, 2017, 18, something like that.
2017.
3 years, and this as well. That's what we're heading for now, except of course it's much worse.
Oksana, what are you writing now? I mean, and what can you write in wartime? What's possible?
Oh goodness! Well, that's a touchy spot. Because on that February 24, 2022. Not only, was I stuck in Warsaw during my 3 days promo trip to the neighboring country, but I was also very rudely interrupted by Mr. Putin at work. With work at my new novel, which actually was already running down, like a waterfall, when the stage, in writing, when you just sweating to follow, that it goes all by itself, and you are happy to just merely to follow. Right. So when I was able to get back and reread what I was having by then. It really read like someone else's work, and I was like, oh, how interesting. Oh, okay. This at the beginning. Okay, this can be edited. Okay, this is too edgy or something that's rough a little bit. And then I got involved, and then because I'd forgotten everything, so I was following very eagerly, and then pow, it was interrupted at the most interesting place and the most interesting moment, and then there were 3 pages of notes showing the further way. Yeah, so of course I recalled the general outline of where I was about to proceed, but it all needs now defrozening, I would say, so I probably need, some literary residency to flee to and to be able to construct an ivory tower or something. In the meantime, well, to answer your question the most directly, right now I'm writing a big essay dedicated to the 40th anniversary of Milan Kundera's tragedy of Central Europe, sorry. The tragedy of Central Europe, because this essay is widely celebrated in what used to be known as Central Europe, and now needs some, I don't know, reframing, or well, the matter, of this European identity again became a touchy spot 40 years later, and again one Polish publisher is preparing an anthology of essays about these essays, and I got an invitation to participate, which I accepted with gratitude and much enthusiasm, because that's a very interesting subject.
Let me thank you so much for joining us here on Encounters with Polish and Ukrainian Literature, which, as you know, we started this series of Ukrainian episodes within the context once the war started, and this is I think perhaps the most exciting episode we've had. So thanks so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Don't go away. Please subscribe and click the bell to stay on top of the program. Watch the credits for some recommendations about how you can support aid for Ukraine and for Ukrainians fleeing the war in their country. I'd like to thank all the people who helped make this series possible. The Polish Cultural Institute New York sponsors our program. Bartek Remisko, head of Humanities and Literature at the Polish Cultural Institute New York, is our executive producer. Natalia Iudin is my fellow producer and editor. Our opening and closing music is by Radek Przedpełski. Thank you all for listening and reading along with us. Let's meet again in a month when we'll be talking about the sound of modern Polish poetry, or how recording technology has changed how poets read and write. See you then.
Jest to szary dzień, jak zawsze w tej okolicy. Cała sceneria wydaje się chwilami fotografią z ilustrowanej gazety. Tak szare, tak płaskie są domy, ludzie i pojazdy.